You would think that when it comes to something as final as death, the system would be foolproof, but instead, for every 7 executions, 1 on death row has been found innocent. This means that in the past 25 years, 74 men have been sentenced to a wrongful death. This is my rebuttal to the New York Times editorial, The Humane Death Penalty Charade. Although I agree with the statements made in the article, I don't think it's sufficient enough for the immenseness of the topic that is the death penalty. The main claim is that this article is insufficient and does not cover all the counter-arguments that could be made. The argument points out many problems with the death penalty, but does not really have any credible sources to back it up. First of all, this article doesn't go into detail about the drug makers mentioned and doesn't have any reliable evidence. Although this editorial does point out problems with the procurement of these lethal drugs, it doesn't have a credible source. We are unsure whether to believe this is true or not. What has actually been happening is that European countries have stopped selling lethal drugs to America, and in particular, states that use lethal injection. This is to avoid any legal and moral complications in the future, to avoid any lawsuits or things of that nature. In 1985, the landmark case Heckler v. Cheney, the Supreme Court agreed that the regulation of lethal drugs should be under the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration. But the FDA refused to take over the system, saying it wasn't in their jurisdiction. This means that these lethal drugs are not regulated by a big company that we know, as much as they should be. Next, this article also offers a middle ground for humane or pain-free executions and the possibility of making that an option. Since 1976, nearly half of the executions in the United States have been done wrong. Obviously, these deaths haven't been pain-free or humane. In bodies immediately after executions, doctors measured post-level mortems of a chemical called thiopental, which measures how unconscious an inmate was during the procedure. 43% of those had levels so low that they may have been aware and even awake while the process was going on. Imagine being conscious but paralyzed and being unable to move or speak out. These people that experience this are able to feel the lethal drug take control and burn through their bodies. With the amount that this author talks about the cruelties resulting from botched lethal injections, they never really mention anything about cruel and unusual punishment. This is a topic that comes up a lot in death penalty debates, and it's not mentioned at all in here. Since it seems that many of the executions have been made to be a very painful process, shouldn't this be ruled out by the 8th Amendment that prohibits this? Professor Deno, an esteemed law professor, says that the 8th Amendment's true nature never really says whether or not that pain is unnecessary, but whether there are alternatives. But there are all alternatives to what we do now. Instead of executing a person, we can instead let them live the remainder of their lives in prison. And to the severity of the cases as well as the sheer number of botched lethal injections, the system we have in place now should be considered cruel and unusual. Overall, this editorial has the right idea, but could have used better arguments and references. Hopefully soon there is a resolution to this humane death penalty charade.